Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we're stepping into the shadowed lanes of an old English village, where whispers echo through empty streets, and the great bell of the church has fallen silent. This is the Silent Bell, a Hercule Poirot mystery where every chime, or the absence of one, could mean the difference between truth and a killer's perfect alibi. So gather close, because the investigation begins now. Chapter 1. The Bell Falls Silent. It was one of those evenings that seemed to belong to another time, when the air over the English countryside was soft with the scent of grass and rain, and the narrow lanes wound like ribbons between fields. Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in the corner seat of a first-class railway carriage, a small, exquisitely folded newspaper in hand. His eyes, however, were not on the print. They were on the landscape drifting past, his mind ticking over as neatly as the pocket watch in his waistcoat. It was a curious invitation that had brought him here. A letter from an old acquaintance, Canon Richard Ambrose, vicar of the parish of Bellwood. The tone had been friendly enough, but the postscript had caught Poirot's attention. "It is a matter most peculiar, my friend, and perhaps in your line of work. The bell in our church, which has rung nightly for over 2 centuries, did not toll last Tuesday, nor since. Our bell ringer, old Arthur Briggs, was found at the foot of the tower, quite dead, and with pockets inexplicably full of black feathers." Poirot had, of course, been intrigued. The English countryside did not often call upon the services of the Belgian detective unless something truly out of the ordinary had occurred. And the image, a man lying lifeless beneath a silent bell, pockets stuffed with black feathers, had been enough to stir the curiosity of even the most disciplined mind. The small village of Bellwood was exactly what one might expect: whitewashed cottages, neatly kept gardens, and a green that seemed more ornamental than practical. Yet as Poirot stepped down from the carriage at the little station, he sensed an undercurrent, a subtle shift in the air, as though the place held its breath. Canon Ambrose was waiting for him. A tall, angular man in a slightly worn cassock, with intelligent eyes that suggested a quick mind beneath the clerical reserve. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted warmly, shaking his hand with unexpected firmness. "It is so very good of you to come on such short notice." "It is nothing, mon ami," Poirot replied, his accent crisp. "One must always attend to the call of the mysterious, and I understand that your mystery is one with a most unusual accompaniment." As they walked through the village, Ambrose spoke in low, deliberate tones. Arthur Briggs was, well, as dependable as the sunrise. For 50 years, he climbed the tower each evening at 9 to toll the bell, a tradition that dates back to 1724, when the villagers rang it nightly to mark the end of the day's work. It has never failed, not even during the war. Until now. Poirot listened, his eyes taking in the faces of those they passed, glances quickly averted, whispers beginning as soon as their backs were turned. "You have spoken to the villagers?" he asked. Ambrose hesitated. "Yes and no. They are, I think, unsettled. Some claim it is an omen. Others, well, you know how country folk can be. There are old stories about the bell, tales of a curse, of a pact made long ago. I don't put stock in such things, but Arthur's death has revived them." They reached the churchyard, a square of ancient gravestones leaning at tired angles, the great tower rising above them in weathered stone. The door to the tower stood ajar, its hinges groaning faintly in the breeze. Poirot paused before entering, his gaze sweeping upward to the narrow slit windows. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of dust and metal. A narrow spiral staircase wound upward into shadow. At the base, a dark stain marked the flagstones where Arthur Briggs had fallen. Poirot bent to examine it, his gloved fingers tracing the faint outline of scuff marks leading away toward the door. "You see the feathers?" Ambrose prompted quietly. Poirot straightened, and from his pocket Ambrose produced a small envelope. Inside, neatly sealed, were several of the black feathers. Poirot took one between thumb and forefinger, turning it in the light. "Corvus Caron," he murmured. "The carrion crow. Common enough in these parts, yes?" "Quite. But Arthur had no reason to be carrying them, and certainly not a dozen of them, in both pockets." They ascended the stairs. Each step creaked underfoot until they emerged into the belfry, where the great bell hung motionless. Its surface was mottled with age, the inscription along its rim worn but still legible. "No night shall pass without my voice." Poirot's gaze moved from the bell to the wooden frame that held it, then to the heavy rope dangling through a trapdoor, to the ringing chamber below. He crouched, inspecting the mechanism. "There is nothing here to prevent the ringing," he observed. "The bell is intact, and yet it did not sound." Ambrose nodded grimly. "We tried it ourselves. The sound, it was wrong. Hollow, as though something inside had swallowed the tone. We stopped after one strike." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "May I see inside?" With some effort, they tilted the bell just enough for Poirot to peer within. The interior was dark, but his small electric torch revealed something odd, faint. Smears of what looked like soot, and a single black feather caught in the curve of the metal. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured softly. "The dead man's pockets, and the dead man's bell." They descended in silence, emerging once more into the churchyard where the sun was dipping low. Poirot stood for a long moment, surveying the graves, the crooked path to the lich gate, the cottages beyond. His mind ticked steadily, assembling fragments: a dead bell ringer, black feathers, a bell that would not sing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he asked, "Canon, tell me, on the night the bell fell silent, who was the last to see Arthur?" "Briggs alive." Ambrose frowned. "I believe it was Miss Elspeth Turner. She brings him tea each evening before he climbs the tower. She lives in the cottage opposite." Poirot smiled faintly. "Then, mon ami, perhaps we should pay Miss Turner a visit before the darkness falls completely." They crossed the lane to the small, ivy-clad cottage. Miss Turner proved to be a thin, wiry woman of indeterminate age, with sharp blue eyes, and the kind of posture that suggested a lifetime of self-sufficiency. She invited them in without fuss, setting a pot of tea on the table with brisk efficiency. "Yes, I saw Arthur that night," she confirmed, settling into a chair. "Took him his tea, same as always. He was quieter than usual. Said he'd heard the bell sound strange the night before, like it had a frog in its throat. I laughed, but he didn't. Just took the cup and went up to the tower. I never saw him again." Poirot's head inclined slightly. "And you noticed nothing else unusual?" Miss Turner hesitated. "Well, there was a man. Not from here. Tall. Dark coat, wide-brimmed hat. He was standing by the churchyard gate just before Arthur went in. I thought perhaps he was a visitor, but when I looked again, he was gone." Poirot exchanged a glance with Ambrose. A stranger in a small village, it is always of interest. As they left the cottage, the first chime of a distant clock tower marked the hour. But here in Bellwood, the great church bell remained silent, its voice swallowed by whatever shadow had fallen upon it. And in Poirot's mind, a single thought took root. In a village where everyone knows everyone else, the presence of an unknown man is not chance. It is purpose. Chapter 2. The Man in the Dark Coat. The morning after his arrival in Bellwood was brisk and clear, the kind of autumn day where the air seemed to hold both a chill and a strange clarity. Poirot had risen early, though, as he often remarked, the rising of the sun was a pleasure best appreciated with a warm breakfast already consumed, and had taken the time to arrange every detail of his attire with meticulous precision. The mustaches, waxed to perfection, curved upward in symmetrical confidence. The gray suit was pressed without a single crease, the shoes polished to a mirror sheen. A small thing, perhaps, but for Hercule Poirot, the order of the outward man. was a reflection of the order within. Canon Ambrose was waiting for him in the church vestry, his manner already touched with the weariness of a man who has been asked the same questions many times over. "You think this man Miss Turner saw is important?" he asked without preamble. Poirot lifted a small eyebrow. "Mon cher, in the great tapestry of a crime, it is sometimes the smallest thread that, when pulled, unravels the whole. A stranger in a village where no one is a stranger, is that not already suspicious?" Ambrose conceded the point, and they set off together to call upon those who might have seen or heard something of this mysterious visitor. The first was Mrs. Hargreaves, proprietress of the Bellwood Post Office, a sturdy woman with an air of authority that suggested she not only knew everyone in the village, but also their business, often before they did. She recalled, after some thought, that a tall man in a dark coat had indeed come into the shop on the afternoon of Arthur's death, asking for directions to the church tower. "Didn't buy a thing," she said, pursing her lips. Had an odd way of speaking, not foreign exactly, but clipped, like he didn't want to say more than he had to. Paid no attention to anyone else. Just asked and left. Poirot inquired delicately about his features, but Mrs. Hargreaves could offer little, hat pulled low. Couldn't see much of his face, but his hands were pale, long fingers. Clean nails, mind you, not the hands of a laborer. From the post office, they went to the village green, where old George Pickett was mending a fence. Pickett was a man of 80 with eyes sharp as a magpie's. He claimed he had seen a shadow of a man near the lich gate around dusk, watching the church. When pressed for detail, he admitted he'd turned away for a moment, and when he looked back, the man was gone. Slipped away like smoke, he did. Didn't hear a footstep. Poirot filed this away in that private mental cabinet of his, where each fact, no matter how small, was placed with care. It was then that Poirot asked Ambrose to take him into the bell tower once more, this time without haste. They began. In the ringing chamber, where the thick rope hung coiled at the side, the wooden floor worn smooth by decades of feet. Poirot examined the walls, noting faint scratches near the baseboards and a small fragment of something brittle. It might have been paint, or perhaps something else entirely. In the belfry above, the soot-like smears within the bell caught his attention again. He touched one lightly with a gloved finger, sniffed it, then frowned. Not soot, cannon. Something with a different character. He would not say more, just yet. Instead, he paced the chamber, his gaze fixed on the pattern of dust upon the floorboards. "Observe," he said at last. "These are the marks of Arthur Briggs's boots, heavy, thick-soled. But here, do you see? A second set, lighter, narrower, pointing not toward the bell rope but away, toward the stair." Ambrose leaned down, squinting. And yet Arthur was alone. Was he? Poirot asked softly. They descended and crossed to the churchyard, where Poirot's eyes lingered on the gate. He ran a finger along the iron latch and found, clinging there, a small black feather caught in a wisp of cobweb. "You see, mon ami, the motif repeats itself. Feathers in the pockets. A feather in the bell. A feather at the gate. Always the black feather. This, I think, is no accident." Their next call was to the Bellwood Arms, the local inn. The innkeeper, Mr. Dobbs, was a large man with a habit of polishing glasses even when they were spotless. He confirmed that a stranger had taken a room for one night only, arriving late, leaving before dawn, and paying in cash. Didn't give a name, Dobbs said. Had a small leather case with him, nothing more. And he kept to himself. Didn't even want supper. Poirot's interest sharpened at this. "And which room?" "Number 3, up the stairs. It's empty now, of course." They went up, and Poirot examined the small, tidy space. Nothing seemed out of place until he looked beneath the bed and retrieved a scrap of folded parchment, the edges singed as if by flame. The writing was faint, but he could just make out a fragment. "Last toll of the bell, midnight. The debt shall be paid." Poirot slipped it into an envelope with the utmost care. "There is, mon ami, a story behind this bell that you have not yet told me," he said to Ambrose as they left. The vicar hesitated. "There is an old legend. In the year 1724, the bell was cast and hung here by a wealthy merchant, Elias Blackthorne. It is said that he made a pact to ring the bell every night without fail, in exchange for prosperity for the village. But there were darker whispers, that the pact was not with God, but with something else, and that if the bell should ever fall silent, the price would be exacted." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "And the black feathers?" "Blackthorne's crest bore a crow. It appears on the church records of the time. Some say he could command the birds, though I've always thought it nonsense." "Nonsense, perhaps," Poirot murmured. "But it is remarkable how nonsense has a way of guiding the steps of those who believe in it, or those who would use it." That afternoon, Poirot took a solitary walk through the lanes, considering what he had gathered. A man in a dark coat, a bell that would not ring, a dead bell ringer with crow's feathers in his pockets, a burnt fragment of a note referring to a debt and the last toll. And the villagers, already whispering of curses, providing the perfect cover for something more human and more deliberate. He paused at the edge of a field, where a single crow sat upon the fence, watching him with bright, unblinking eyes. Poirot regarded it for a long moment, then tipped his hat slightly. "Tell your master, mon ami," he said quietly, "that Hercule Poirot is listening." And with that, he turned back toward the village, where the next steps in his investigation awaited, and where, he suspected, the man in the dark coat was not yet far from sight. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. The following day dawned under a low, pewter sky, the kind that pressed the horizon close and made the narrow lanes of Belwood seem all the more enclosed. Poirot, who believed in the restorative powers of a perfectly measured breakfast, lingered over a single boiled egg and a pot of coffee before setting out. Canon Ambrose arrived promptly, his expression betraying a mixture of anticipation and unease. "You've been thinking," he said without preamble as they stepped into the chill air. Poirot smiled faintly. "Always, mon ami. But today we must think together of the past, of the history that the good people of Belwood may prefer to leave in shadow." Their first destination was the parish archives, housed in a narrow chamber at the back of the church. Here, under the dim light from a mullioned window, Ambrose produced a stack of bound ledgers, their leather covers worn smooth by centuries of handling. Poirot leafed through the records, pausing at the year 1724. The entry for that year was penned in an ornate, almost ostentatious hand. "On the 14th day of October, Elias Blackthorne hath gifted the great bell to the parish of Belwood, to be rung each evening at the 9th hour, without fail, for the prosperity and good fortune of the village. Let this toll be unbroken until the end of time." Beneath this, in a different ink, a single line had been added some years later. "If the bell shall fail, the debt shall be claimed." Poirot tapped the page lightly with a gloved finger. "And here, the seed of superstition is planted. Tell me, Canon, who was this Elias Blackthorne?" Ambrose hesitated before answering. "A merchant of considerable wealth, though his fortune was made under circumstances never entirely explained. He lived in the manor on the far side of the marshes, and was said to be a man of both generosity and severity. The Blackthorne estate has long since fallen into ruin. His only son died young, and the line ended." Poirot's eyes flickered. "And yet, I think, not all debts end with the death of the debtor." They left the archives and set out toward the marshes, the air growing damper with each step. The path wound past willows and reeds until, at last, the crumbling outline of Blackthorne Manor emerged from the mist. The great stone house stood in decay, windows like hollow eyes, its roof sagging where time had claimed its due. The iron gates were rusted but unfastened, and with a small effort, they pushed them open. Within, the silence was deep enough to hear the caw of a distant crow. Inside the manor, dust lay thick upon the floors, and faded portraits stared down from the walls. In one, Elias Blackthorne himself, a man with sharp features, a high brow, and eyes that seemed to follow one from the frame. And there, in the corner of the canvas, painted with subtle detail, was a single black crow. Poirot studied the portrait for a long moment, noting the peculiar positioning of the bird, perched not upon a branch, but upon the curve of what appeared to be a bronze bell. Ambrose, standing beside him, crossed himself almost unconsciously. "Remarkable," Poirot murmured. "Even in art, the symbol repeats. Always the bell, always the crow." They explored the ground floor, finding little of value until Poirot's keen eyes caught sight of a narrow door hidden behind a rotting tapestry. It led to a small study, its walls lined with shelves of books and ledgers. Upon the desk, under a layer of dust, lay a small locked chest. Ambrose fetched a letter opener from the desk, and, with some persuasion, the lock yielded. Inside were several objects: a bundle of black feathers tied with twine, a fragment of cracked bronze with a familiar inscription, "No night shall pass without my voice," and a folded letter, brittle with age. Poirot opened it with care, scanning the neat script. "To the keeper of the toll, whosoever he may be, know that the ringing of the bell binds not merely the sound but the promise. Let no man fail in this duty, for the crow watches, and the debt endures until paid in full." Ambrose drew back slightly. "It reads almost like a curse." Poirot's eyes glittered. "Or a contract, dressed in the robes of superstition. You see, mon ami, such words can be used and misused by those with a mind for manipulation." As they left the manor, Poirot paused at the threshold, glancing toward the marsh. There, at the edge of the reeds, stood a lone figure in a dark coat, motionless, the brim of his hat pulled low. For a heartbeat, Poirot's gaze locked with the figure's. Then the man turned, vanishing into the mist with a swiftness that was almost unnatural. "You saw him?" Ambrose asked, his voice taut. "I saw," Poirot replied evenly, "and I think he wished us to see." That afternoon, Poirot returned alone to the church, requesting from Ambrose the key to the belfry. Once inside, he moved with slow precision, examining each timber, each rope, each stone. Near the base of the bell frame, he found something new: a thin length of black silk cord, knotted in an unfamiliar pattern, tied to the bell's clapper. The knot was clever, designed so that the clapper could move only a fraction of its range, muting the bell's voice. And caught within the knot, another black feather. "Trace interesant," Poirot murmured. "It is not the curse that silences the bell, it is the hand of a man." That evening, he joined Ambrose for supper, speaking little, lost in thought. At last, as the fire crackled in the grate, Poirot leaned forward. "Canon, I will need to speak with Miss Turner again, and also with Mr. Dobbs at the inn. There are questions of timing, of who was where and when. And I will also require a list of any descendants, legitimate or otherwise, of the Blackthorne family, no matter how distant." Ambrose looked startled. "You think this is about the Blackthorns?" Poirot's mustaches twitched. "I think, mon ami, that in every village there is a thread that runs from past to present, and sometimes it is pulled by a hand that seeks not justice, but payment. The question is, payment for what?" Outside, the night deepened, and though the hour came when the great bell should have rung, the tower remained silent, its voice stilled by a knot and a feather. And somewhere in the darkness, a man in a dark coat waited, as though listening for the silence itself. Chapter 4. The Keeper of Secrets. The following morning found Poirot already at work, seated at a small writing desk in his lodging, the early light falling across an orderly array of notes. Each name, each observation from the past 2 days, was listed in his fine, looping hand. He had written Miss Elspeth Turner, and beneath it, last to see Arthur alive, mentioned stranger. Then Mrs. Hargreaves, stranger asked for directions to church. Then George Pickett, shadow near Lichgate, vanished. Beneath Mr. Dobbs, he had underlined the words Room 3, burnt parchment, debt, and bell. Finally, in a neat circle, the words Blackthorn Legacy, feathers, not on clapper. Satisfied with the clarity of his own thoughts, he dressed with his usual precision and went first to Miss Turner's cottage. She received him with the brisk hospitality of one accustomed to minding her own business but curious enough to indulge a visit from the famous Belgian detective. "I told you all I know," she said, setting a cup of tea before him. Poirot smiled. "Ah, madam, one never tells all one knows at once. There are always little details, small things one remembers only later." She pursed her lips but did not contradict him. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "On that evening, when you saw the stranger, how close was he to Arthur Briggs?" She frowned, thinking. "Not close. Across the churchyard." Arthur didn't seem to notice him. But she hesitated. "Yes," Poirot prompted gently. "Well, after Arthur went into the tower, I thought I saw the man walk along the hedge toward the side gate. But I can't be sure. It was getting dark." Poirot thanked her and left, filing this new path in his mind. The side gate, he recalled, led not to the lane but to the narrow footpath behind the churchyard wall, a path that curved toward the old mill road, and, eventually, the marshes. Next he went to the Bellwood Arms. Mr. Dobbs was behind the bar polishing glasses, as always. "Room 3, monsieur," he said when Poirot inquired. "We've cleaned it since, but you're welcome to look again." Poirot ascended, noting the creak of the second stair from the top, a detail he stored away. In the room, he searched not for what was visible, but for what was not. In the wardrobe, pushed against the very back, his fingers found a single card, thick, cream-colored, blank except for a faint embossed outline of a crow in the upper corner. He held it to the light and smiled faintly. "So," he murmured, "our stranger announces himself to those who know the sign." Returning to the bar, he asked Dobbs, "This man, did he speak with anyone else while here?" Dobbs shook his head. "Not that I saw. Ate nothing, drank nothing. Just went up to his room." Poirot pressed. "And when he left?" Dobbs thought. "Early, before I was down. But Mary in the kitchen said she heard the front door at around 5. Poirot nodded and left. In the lane, Canon Ambrose met him, holding a small ledger. "You asked for Blackthorn descendants," he said. "It's thin. The family died out, as I told you. But there was a distant cousin, a Joseph Mallory. Left the village years ago. No one's heard of him since." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Mallory, a name not without interest. Does it occur in the parish records of Arthur Briggs's youth?" Ambrose blinked. "I suppose it might." "Why?" Poirot smiled. "Because, my dear Canon, if the bell has been silenced to settle a debt, perhaps the debt was not to Blackthorn at all, but to one who claims his legacy." That afternoon, Poirot requested that Ambrose summon several of the villagers to the vestry under the pretense of a meeting about the bell's repair. Miss Turner, Mrs. Hargreaves, Mr. Dobbs, and old George Pickett arrived, along with a young farmhand named Peter Hale, who had been in the churchyard the night of the death. Poirot stood before them, hands neatly folded. "Mess Amos, I thank you for coming. I have one question for each of you. On the night the bell fell silent, did any of you see or hear a man in a dark coat and wide-brimmed hat after the 9th hour?" Each shook their head, except Peter Hale, who shifted uneasily. "I might have. Along the mill road. He was walking fast, head down. Didn't look up, even when I called. Thought he might be a traveler." Poirot nodded slowly. "And, did you see where he went?" "Toward the marsh path," Peter said. After the meeting, Poirot and Ambrose took the marsh path themselves. The air was heavy with the smell of brine and wet earth. They followed the narrow track until it opened onto a low rise overlooking the ruins of Blackthorn Manor. There, in the soft earth, Poirot crouched to examine a set of footprints, narrow, long, with a faint diagonal scuff at the heel. The same pattern, he knew, as the lighter prints in the belfry. He comes here often, Poirot murmured. Perhaps he even stays here. They entered the manor cautiously. In the great hall, faint traces of recent presence, an extinguished candle stub, a tin cup on the mantel, a fold of dark cloth snagged on a splintered chair. And on the desk in the study, beside the old chest they had opened the day before, a fresh item, a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Poirot unwrapped it, slowly, revealing a short length of black silk cord, identical to the one that had bound the bell's clapper. "He has been here since we last came," Poirot said quietly, "and he leaves us a message." That night, Poirot asked Ambrose to join him in the church at the 9th hour. The tower loomed above them, silent as a tomb. Poirot examined the base of the rope, then, without warning, pulled sharply. The bell gave a muted, hollow sound, and from the shadows at the side gate, a figure moved. Poirot stepped forward into the light of the lantern, calling out in a voice that carried across the yard, "Monsieur Mallory, or should I say, the last of the Blackthorn blood, will you not join us?" The figure froze, then turned slowly, the dark coat shifting in the breeze, the wide-brimmed hat tilted to conceal his face. For a long moment he stood, as though weighing the wisdom of approach, and then, without a word, he stepped into the light, the pale hands unmistakable. Poirot's eyes glittered. "Bon, now we may speak of bells, of crows, and of debts that refuse to die." Chapter 5. The Echoes in the Belfry. The belfry was colder than the night air outside, its vast, shadowed interior smelling faintly of oil, dust, and something far older. Poirot stepped in first, his polished shoes tapping against the wooden planks as if marking time against the silence. Inspector Graves followed, his flashlight sweeping across the massive bell that loomed in the center like a dark, waiting sentinel. High above, ropes swayed gently, though there was no wind. Lady Ashcombe stood at the threshold, her hands clasped so tightly they were white. Poirot's eyes traced the lines of the walls, the age-worn wood, the iron bolts, then stopped at a faint mark along the railing. "It is here," he said softly, almost to himself. "The past always leaves an imprint, no matter how carefully one tries to erase it." Lady Ashcombe's breath caught. Poirot turned to her, his gaze sharp but not cruel. "You came here the night George died, and you were not alone." She shook her head, but the denial rang hollow. Poirot's voice softened. "The vicar's journal recorded a late visitor that night, and the scent of your perfume lingers even in these old boards." "You argued." "He fell," she whispered. "It wasn't meant to happen. I only wanted to protect the family secret." Poirot moved closer to the bell, gesturing for Graves to inspect its underside. A small compartment was found, hidden, behind decades of dust. Inside, a faded velvet pouch lay waiting. Graves opened it, and the dull gleam of uncut gemstones caught the weak light. "Smuggled during the war," Poirot explained quietly. "Hidden here by your grandfather. The bell became your guardian, and your prison." Outside, the first light of dawn slipped through the cracks in the belfry, touching the bells. Surface in gold. Lady Ashcombe was led away, her steps slow, her head bowed. Poirot lingered, listening to the faint hum of the metal as though the bell itself was sighing in relief. "It is curious," he murmured, "how a single chime can carry decades of truth." The bell would ring again that morning, not as a signal of concealment, but as a monument to the secrets it once held and the lives they had shaped. And so ends this chapter in the world of Hercule Poirot, where silence is rarely empty, and every echo has a voice. If you want to journey deeper into the shadows with us, uncovering the smallest clues and the greatest lies, then subscribe now and join us for the next case. because the next mystery may already be whispering at your door.